Bien, pues muy buenas tardes y una cálida acogida a todos los que estáis asistiendo a esta ponencia. Voy a presentarles al profesor, al doctor Matthias Armgardt, que viene de la Universidad de Hamburgo. Nos viene a hablar, a comentar y a presentar también una metodología altamente revolucionaria, y digo así por lo que hemos estado compartiendo estos días en nuestro equipo de trabajo, más los compañeros y colegas distinguidos de nuestra universidad, acerca del cambio de paradigma de las fuentes de la crítica textual bíblica de Wellhausen, que tienen ya una trayectoria, unos antecedentes que ya podemos ver en el siglo XVIII con Jan Strug, ¿no?, que ya propuso varias manos o varias fuentes en lo que es el libro del Génesis, y a partir de ahí pues, se fueron desarrollando y consolidando esta tendencia de la fuente yavista, eloísta, etcétera, etcétera, ¿no?, que habitualmente se estudia, ¿no?, en el campo bíblico. Precisamente desde hace unos años esta tendencia pues, se está rompiendo en un sentido también constructivo de la palabra, ¿eh? No se trata de hacer demolición, porque también hay que respetar el trabajo de los ancestros que nos van abriendo caminos a nuevas líneas de investigación, y eso también hay que tenerlo en cuenta. Pero precisamente y gracias a las novedades arqueológicas y epigráficas, pues también podemos ahora, gracias a eminentes especialistas como el profesor Armgardt, más los expertos que tenemos en nuestro departamento de estudios bíblicos, en esta Santa Casa de San Dámaso, pues podemos ya empezar a atrevernos a lanzar otras líneas de investigación que, como ejemplo, y bien menciona el profesor Armgardt, pues tenemos las tablillas en escritura cuneiforme de Tel Hatzor del Segundo Milenio, entre lo que llamamos arqueológicamente el bronce medio y el bronce tardío, que ya va a llegar a esa época de la entrada de Josué y la conquista de Josué de la ciudad de Tel Hatzor, donde estoy excavando desde el año 96. Y gracias precisamente a estas tablillas, donde tenemos legislación fragmentaria, pero legislación que refleja muy bien el espíritu de las leyes que emana del dominio amorreo, que a todo el mundo nos suena el rey Hammurabi y su famoso Código de Babilonia. Hay paralelismos preciosos y muy concretos en estas tablillas que hemos encontrado excavando en Tel Hatzor, y esto también nos enriquece desde este punto particular, más las aportaciones que va a hacer el profesor Matthias sobre este tema. Por tanto, es un viaje fascinante en el tiempo con estas cuestiones novísimas de la crítica textual. Y también pues, quiero darles un perfil de lo que es el profesor, que está vinculado a la Facultad de Derecho, catedrático de la Universidad de Hamburgo. Y entonces tiene también, él es muy original en este sentido, científicamente demostrado, ¿no?, de plantear nuevos enfoques de razonamiento jurídico. Él dirige la cátedra Núcleos de Historia Jurídica Global y Derecho Civil y Teoría Jurídica Computacional. Tiene proyectos abiertos de investigación internacionales en el campo de la lógica jurídica con las universidades de Lille, Bolonia, Viena y la Universidad Libre de Berlín. También tiene diversas estancias en Vancouver, en Harvard, Stanford y Berkeley. Es actualmente también profesor permanente de la Escuela de Verano de Derecho y Lógica de Florencia. Y entre sus líneas de investigación pues tenemos historia legal antigua en general y sobre todo desde un punto de vista comparativo. Es también especialista en filosofía del derecho de Leibniz, y también es un amplio investigador en novedades, que es muy propia de nuestro tiempo, como la teoría jurídica que se utiliza con la inteligencia artificial, el derecho y la lógica. Así que le damos de verdad un cordial bienvenida. Le agradecemos mucho, ¿no?, que haya aprovechado este ratico de un martes por la tarde pues, para estar con nosotros y aportar con la ciencia que también rige nuestra casa. So, thank you very much, very welcome for being with us. So, whenever you want, you can start.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much, dear Heidi, for the kind introduction. So, dear colleagues and students, it is an honor and pleasure for me to give a presentation about the Torah or the Pentateuch at San Damaso today. In this lecture, I would like to advocate for a paradigm shift in Pentateuch research. My perspective is that of a legal historian who works on antiquity with focus on biblical and rabbinical law. Only a few legal historians deal with the Pentateuch. As a result, legal historical arguments for dating and interpreting the text are often neglected. The Torah contains law and can therefore be compared with other ancient laws, of course. In addition, as a legal theorist, I deal with the principles of rational evaluation of evidence. I would also like to argue from this perspective because historical reconstructions are essentially based on the evaluation of evidence. Professor Reuven Yaron, a legal historian from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, was one of the leading experts on cuneiform law and of ancient Jewish law as well. Among other things, he translated and annotated the ancient Babylonian Codex Eshnunna, and I will return to some of his observations in the course of this lecture. Another world-renowned scholar who made outstanding contributions to Pentateuch research was Professor Kenneth Kitchen. He taught Egyptology and archaeology at the University of Liverpool and was a leading expert on the second millennium BC, especially on Pharaoh Ramesses II. In his book, On the Reliability of the Old Testament, he has presented a great deal of external reference material from the perspective of Egyptology and archaeology, which must be taken into account in the evaluation of evidence. Another monumental work by Kitchen and the linguist Lawrence is the 3-volume book Treaty, Law, and Covenant in the Ancient Near East. This work compiles all legal texts from the ancient Near East, covering 3 millennia and 10 ancient languages, and Kitchen's findings have so far been given very little consideration by Old Testament scholars, especially in Germany. I will come back to this later. I would also like to draw your attention to a conference proceeding that I edited together with 2 Protestant theologians. In addition to theologians, legal historians, and linguists also contributed to the conference and to the publication. In the following, I would like to briefly outline the standard model and its development history. I will then present the arguments for the standard model and the counter-arguments. Finally, I would like to outline approaches to a rational theory of evidence assessment. As you all know, of course, the Torah or Pentateuch consists of 5 books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or Deuteronomy in English. In the 19th century, the well-known German Old Testament scholar Julius Wellhausen developed the view that the Torah is a compilation from several sources, based on the alternation of the words El or Elohim and Yahweh. He assumed that the first 2 sources were the Yahwist and the Elohist. In addition, he believed he could identify priestly material, and he regarded the book of Deuteronomy as completely independent. Furthermore, Deuteronomy should have been written first, it is before the first 4 books of Moses. This is the documentary hypothesis in a nutshell, which is familiar to all theologians, so I will not go into it in detail now. I would rather take a closer look at the basic idea. As early as 1940, the Jewish scholars Cassuto criticized the foundations of the documentary hypothesis with very strong arguments, but German Old Testament scholars hardly took any notice of them. Cassuto saw that the change from Elo Elohim to Yahweh was not accidental, but followed a specific intention. When the Bible speaks of God as the creator of the universe, he is referred to as El or Elohim, a generic name, God. When he speaks to Adam and Eve, he makes use of his proper name, Yahweh. Thus, the basic idea of the documentary hypothesis is and was not very convincing. Furthermore, it was not possible to convincingly assign the individual sentences of the Torah to their alleged sources. Finally, in the 20th century, the two alleged authors, Yahwist and Elohist, were buried, meaning that this part of the theory was abandoned, more or less. Countless individual theories have emerged, and it is hardly possible to present them all in a textbook for students. Looking at the state of research from the detached perspective of a legal historian, it seems to be clear that there are still two basic assumptions in the German mainstream that are shared by many. First, it is assumed that Deuteronomy was written earlier than the priestly material P. Many assume that Deuteronomy was written during the time of King Josiah and the Assyrian king Esarhaddon. It is in the middle to late 7th century BC. Second, the first 4 books of Moses are said to be of exilic or even post-exilic origin. The overview is made more difficult by the fact that many editorial processes are assumed for which there is no external evidence. This brings me to the basis of my considerations. A rational explanation of historical facts requires sufficient evidence. It is not sufficient to show that a theory is only possible. It is necessary to show that a possible theory is more probable than the source or the alternative theories by taking into account all available material and sources. Data have to be respected and not manipulated by theories, and the text of the Bible is data. Of course, the Bible can contain errors, but he who argues against the data has the burden of proof. In the following, I would first like to examine the evidence for the standard models. As mentioned, the standard model for dating Deuteronomy sets the date at the middle of the 7th century. At this point, an attempt was made to argue using external data, which is, of course, a good method in itself. The argument is based on a comparison of the Neo-Assyrian Vassal Treaty of Esarhaddon from 627 BC with the chapters 13 and 28 of Deuteronomy. In Esarhaddon's vassal treaties, the subjugated king had to pledge obedience to Esarhaddon, and in the event of a breach of contract, they had to curse themselves. Deuteronomy also contains lists of curses, and Frankena claimed as early as 1965 that the similarity was so great that one could assume that a vassal contract had influenced the creation of the book of Deuteronomy. When I, myself, first compared the curse list of Esarhaddon and Deuteronomy, I was disappointed. The similarity did not seem very significant to me. But we do not need to analyze the details here. In his book, Treaty Law and Covenant from 2012, Kitchen showed that there are curse lists from the 2nd millennium that fit much better with Deuteronomy. Even Professor Eckhard Otto from Munich, who has worked on this paradigm for decades, now admits that Frankena's attempt to prove this fact has failed. When I recently asked him, Professor Otto, if there was any new evidence, he said, no. Burckhardt, Seibold, and von Ungern-Sternberg made another attempt to prove that the book of Deuteronomy originated in the 7th century. In their book from 2014 about legislation in ancient societies, they compared the laws of Deuteronomy with the Roman 12 tables and the Greek laws of Solon and Gotthyn. They wanted to defend that Deuteronomy was written or modified by King Josiah during his reign from 639 to 609 BC. This is against the evidence of the Bible itself, because in the second book of the Kings, we read that the high priest Hilkiah found a law book. He says, according to 2 Kings 22:8, I found this book of the law. To correct this textual finding and turn the discovery of a law book into a writing of a law book, evidence is needed. The result of comparing Deuteronomy with the Roman 12 tables, the laws of Solon and the laws of Cotton, is that there is no serious evidence to suggest that Deuteronomy was written during this period. The differences are too important. The studies actually provide evidence to the contrary. For example, the capital city, Jerusalem, is not mentioned in Jerusalem. And contrary to what the false paradigm suggests, there are also no royal prerogatives mentioned in Deuteronomy 17. Let me sum up the first result. There is no evidence for the main assumption of the standard model that the book Deuteronomy was written in the 7th century BC. The Bible text claims the exact opposite, that a pre-existing book of law was found during that time. Attempts to attain external evidence by comparing Esarhaddon's vessel treatise or other legal texts from the first millennium have failed. And theories must not be evaluated stronger than the data than the text of the Bible. Now I would like to present some evidence against the standard model that I consider significant. First, I would like to take an initial look at Deuteronomy from the perspective of a legal historian. The Deuteronomy contains, first of all, modifications of rules that demand pre-existing rules. When dealing with the structure of legal systems, it is clear that the modification or addition of a rule cannot have been created before the original rule. In his brilliant dissertation of 2015, Benjamin Kilcher has shown that the laws of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers precede the Deuteronomic laws, and that these had already a quasi-canonical status when Deuteronomy was written. I was not astonished at all to read this. However, from the perspective of legal history, there are further strong arguments against the assumption that the Deuteronomy has been written in the first millennium. It is very important to compare biblical law with the ancient Oriental Codex Hammurabi and the Codex Eshnunna, both of which date from the 18th century BC. The Codex Eshnunna is more important for dating questions because, unlike the Codex Hammurabi, it was not part of scribal training and it was not passed down over many centuries. This is related to the fact that Hammurabi conquered Eshnunna, located north of Babylon. It is very revealing to compare the Codex Eshnunna and the Codex Hammurabi with the Covenant Code. This is Exodus 21:1 till 22:16. You have a chart with Codex Eshnunna and Hammurabi of the Old Babylon. If we follow Kitchen and accept the late dating, Moses would have lived around 1250 BC. From there, it is still 500 years until the Old Babylonian legal corpora. This is a lot of time. Let us now compare the Codex Eshnunna and the Covenant Code. Already Reuben Yaron observed the striking similarity between Exodus 21:35 and Codex Eshnunna 53. I read the texts. First Exodus, and if one man's ox hurt another's, that he die, then they shall sell the living ox and divide the money of it. And the dead ox also they shall divide. And now Eshnunna, if an ox gores another ox, and thus causes its death, the two ox owners shall divide the value of the living ox and the carcass of the dead ox. From a legal point of view, Exodus 21 and Codex Ischnuna 53 present a very significant parallel, a model of damage sharing in tort law. Damage sharing rules are very seldom in private law and in tort law. According to these rules, a double sharing takes place. The money for the sold goring ox and the flesh of the killed ox are shared. And this is a unique tort law rule in legal history. I do not know of any parallel. Another example is suggesting that the author of the Covenant Code was familiar with the Codex Hammurabi and the Codex of Ischnuna is shown in the following table on the goring ox. This was already made by Jackson. And you see here now the outcome. Numerous combinations can be formed from the categories vicious or non-vicious goring ox on the one side and the victims, man, son, slave, ox. We see that biblical law contains all the combinations found in the Codex Hammurabi and Codex Ischnuna, and in addition regulates another case that is not contained in any of these models. So, thus, Exodus 21 contains the most sophisticated set of rules about goring oxes so far known. Probably Exodus makes use of Codex Ischnuna and Codex Hammurabi. The striking carefulness of rules is a hint that at that time, accidents with goring ox were important and often. This might be an indication of a nomadic society, where such accidents are more likely. Now I come to some observations on legal history that I made about the book of Genesis. It concerns the story of Joseph. Jacob's 10 sons were in Egypt and they did not recognize Joseph as their brother. Joseph kept Simeon as a hostage and demanded Benjamin. But Jacob did not want to let Benjamin go. In this situation, Judah offered himself as surety to his father that Benjamin would return. Judah said to Jacob, Genesis 43:9, I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. The word for I will be surety for him in Hebrew is e'arvenu, and it comes from arav. When the brothers were back in Egypt, Judah said to Joseph, For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. And so on. And for thy servant became surety is in Hebrew, ki avdecha arav, again arav. Why is this surety of importance? Here's a problem. According to modern law and to Roman law, we need 3 independent persons for surety: the creditor, the debtor, and the surety. If there are only 2 persons and no obligation is to be secured, a surety does not make any sense at all, because the obligation already causes liability in itself. The solution is to be found in legal history. According to old Babylonian law, an obligation did not cause liability. Very strange from our modern understanding. An additional guarantee or self-surety was necessary. The later development is as follows. The self-suretyship disappeared in Babylonian law very early in the Neo-Babylonian period, 626 to 530 39, as Koschaka observed. In the biblical law of the later period, we find the common three-person suretyship. In Proverbs 27:13 we read, "Take his garment that is surety for a stranger, and take a pledge of him for a strange woman." Here we find the typical three-person situation. In the first case, we have the creditor taking the surety, the stranger or debtor, and the surety who secures the debt of the stranger. And it is the same verb, arav. Different suretyship now. Thus we come to the following result. The surety of Judah can only be understood as a self-surety or guarantee. This kind of surety was necessary according to the law of the Old Babylonian period, because the obligations did not cause liability during this period. This changed at the beginning of the Neo-Babylonian period. Thus, the surety of Judah fits very well in the Old Babylonian period, but not in the Neo-Babylonian period. It is also very revealing to compare the structure of the federal treaty between God and Israel with the structures of international treaties. Kitchen has done groundbreaking work in this field. He has shown that there are 6 different phases which can be distinguished by significant changes in the structure of the treaties. Phase 5 lasts from approximately 1400 BC to 1200 BC. It is documented by the Hittite covenants. Comparisons show that the structure of the Sinai covenant is very similar to that of the Hittite covenants. And in contrast, it differs significantly from the treaty structure we encounter in phase 6, which lasts from 900 until 650 BC. And you will see it now. Here is the structure of the Hittite covenants. And here is the structure of the Sinai covenant we find in the Bible. Almost the same, only 6 and 7 are changed. And now let's go for phase 6. Completely different. Completely different. The result of this comparison is as follows. The structure of the Sinai covenant only fits in the pattern of phase 5, 1400 to 1200 BC, and not at all in the pattern of phase 6. This is strong circumstantial evidence for the dating of Kitchen 1250 BC around. According to Kitchen, Moses was a contemporary of Pharaoh Ramesses II, and Kitchen presented much more evidence for that, but not related to my field of research, legal history. So another interesting observation of Kitchen are the subject analogues he found in the 3 millennia BC. It is very striking how many he found in the 2nd millennium and how few in the 1st millennium. If we count this together, we come to the result that there are 107 analogues for the 2nd millennium versus only 7 for the 1st. And this is strong circumstantial evidence for the theory that the Torah was written in the 2nd millennium. For a long time, it was considered highly unlikely that a writing culture existed in Canaan towards the end of the 2nd millennium that would have enabled the reception of ancient Babylonian law. But this time is over. The excavator of Tel Chassor, and Professor Johnson is one of them, detected in 2010 2 fragments of law of the Old Babylonian period similar to Codex Hammurabi, Codex Ishnuna, and the Covenant Code. Thus, it is sure that cuneiform law existed in the Levantine when Israel came to Canaan. The late Raymond Westbrook expected that already in 1985. Raymond Westbrook was a professor of ancient legal history. There are no difficulties anymore to assume the possibility and probability of such a cultural transfer in the second millennium. Let me come to the final result now. There is, in my eyes, no convincing evidence for the standard model. There is strong circumstantial evidence against the standard models. And Eckhart Otto recently asked in a paper, what went wrong in the last 200 years? The answer is, in my eyes, very clear. The mainstream took the wrong basis. The Wellhausen-style paradigm is wrong. And this caused the chaos of theories we have now. John van Citas, originally one of the most liberal minimalists, finally wrote in his book, The Edited Bible, in 2006, quote, "It is time to rid biblical scholarship of this great fantasy and to attempt to reconstruct historically the development of the biblical text as the basis of its interpretation and exegesis." I think this is the right way. And we can learn a lesson from Roman law too. In the early 20th century, there were strong assumptions of interpolations of the corpus juris civilis. The corpus juris civilis is a compilation of classical Roman law that was made under Emperor Justinian in late antiquity in the 6th century, and the classical material came from the 1st to the early 3rd century. It was more than 300 years old when the corpus juris civilis was made. In the early 20th century, almost every fragment of the digest was suspected to be interpolated. This is very unrealistic because Tribonian's team had only 3 years to create the digests. The paradigm shift in Roman law came in the 1970s. The new standard today is no assumption of interpolation without strong objective evidence. There are even parallels in physics. The mathematician and Nobel Prize laureate Roger Penrose criticized sharply the new physics of the universe in his book, Fashion, Faith, and Fantasy in the New Physics of the Universe from 2016. What he criticizes most is the lacking sufficient objective control of theories by data. Thus, there are many reasons to give up the old paradigm, and it is not a phenomenon that is to be found only in theology. I would like to end with an outline of a theory of rational evaluation of evidence. The crucial point is, in my eyes, the rational weighing of probabilities. Every historical source is evidence or data, even the Bible. Who argues against a source has the burden of proof, and there must not be a shift of burden of proof against the sources. It's the main mistake. It is a void circular argument to modify a source according to a theory which is itself not based on an independent source or external evidence being stronger than the source. Second, there must not be a confusion of possibility and probability. To develop a theory that is only possible is not sufficient. There are infinite many possibilities, and only one of them is true. Thus, based on all evidence that is available, it is necessary to show that the theory is most probable. and the probabilities of the solutions have to be balanced. The main theorem of a theory of rational evaluation of evidence is, in my eyes, for all x holds, if x is a possible historical fact, and if there exists an y being a source stating x, and if there exists an z being a model or a theory stating non-x, then the historical probability of x is bigger than that of non-x. And you can put this into a formula, and then it says exactly the same, what I read, only in terms of predicate logic. I repeat, for all x holds, bracket, if x is a possible historical fact, PF, and if there is a y being a source stating x, and if there exists a z being a model or a theory stating non-x, then the historical probability HP of x is bigger than HP of non-x. It's the same. And if we now add external evidence, then we get the following formula: for all x holds, if x is a possible historical fact, and if there exists an y being a source stating x, and now comes the addition, and if there exists an y prime being external evidence stating x, and if there exists a z being a model stating non-x, then the historical probability of x is much bigger than that of non-x. And again, you can make a formula out of it, and I read it again. For all x holds, if x is a possible historical fact, and if there exists an y being a source stating x, and if there exists an y prime being external evidence stating x2, and there exists a z being a model stating non-x, then the historical probability of x is much bigger than of non-x. A full theory of rational evaluation of evidence has to be much stronger, of course, but these two theorems is all I need for this presentation. And my final remark is, do not believe the Germans. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for a brilliant lecture, Professor Armgardt. And yes, it's really exciting to see these new developments of research that your school and your scholarship is doing, and it's expanding even more and more during our fields. And I can tell that thanks to the archaeological expositions, that we are discovering more and more context, to help us understand even more the Bible. I can tell that at Tel Hatzor, we have these leading cuneiform tablets, and we expect to find the archive, which is the main goal of our excavation at Tel Hatzor. We're still dealing with it with a late bronze administrative palace, but we have known for sure that there was a scribal school in Tel Hatzor directly connected to King Hammurabi of Babylon because of the Amorite kingdom of Hammurabi in all the area. So there was a continuation of the scribal schools in Mesopotamia and Babylonia, also in Tel Hatzor, even as far as the late Bronze Age. Not so close to the Joshua times, but it was very, very related to that arrival of this, to the Promised Land. Yeah. So, any questions? ¿Alguna pregunta que queráis hacer? Also, I must remember the context, the Abrahamic context, by the way, because we have the presence of Amorites in Tel Hatzor, and it coincides in time of these cuneiform tablets. We always had the reference of Mari, Ebla, all these magnificent cities, Nusi for the codex recorded about the concubinate in Abraham's story, Hagar and Sarah, and it coincides with the arrival of Abraham, whose name was Abiram, as an Amorite, as Bucciolati has been telling us all these years. So we have this amazing context, and it's really surprising that instead of thinking about these biblical characters as a myth, we are more and more convinced that they are historical figures. Yeah. preguntas.
Yeah, I appreciate your work very much because the findings of Tel Chassor are very important because it was assumed that there was that such a cultural transfer during that time was not thinkable. And now we have the counter-evidence, and no theory is stronger than these findings.
Tienes micrófono, Javier. Sí, mejor. Gracias, Javier.
Thank you very much, Professor Matthias. My question has to do with, again, with the book of the discovery of the book of Deuteronomy in the temple. No? I'm not sure that there is no link between this discovery and the book of Deuteronomy because of the links for example, so the fact that there is this fact reported that has been discovered, a book there in the temple. And starting from this point, we have a reformation of the cult around the temple and the feast, and a kind of vocabulary that has to do with the Deuteronomy, with all your mind, with your heart, no? And all the feast that we have in Deuteronomy, and the king Josiah, no? Puts on the field, no? I think that there are enough evidence to establish a link between that discovery and the book. Yeah. The problem is, you're right, but this book, what is the origin of this book? When it was written? No?
Yeah.
What was, as you know, a lot of scholars said, well, it was Josiah and perhaps Jeremiah, no? The ones who wrote it in that time, no? Or no, it's this book that were discovered or something like this, and then it provoked that reformation of Josiah.
Yes, to me it is the most easy explanation that they found from perhaps the book Deuteronomy, perhaps even more, I do not know. But they found something that already existed. And this simple statement is already against the theory that something was created. Most German theologians think that Deuteronomy was written during this time. And I do not see any evidence for that. They detected something. We do not know exactly what it was, but the detection is not writing a new book or a process of editing or whatever. There's no evidence for that. It is possible. Of course, everything is possible. Almost everything is possible. But we do not have evidence for such an assumption. And we have so strong evidence, circumstantial evidence, that says it is the time of the second millennium that is reflected in many ways by the text. So it probably is written during that time. And if you want to argue against this, we have to bring now stronger evidence that is stronger than what we have, and we make a balance, and then we can see what is more likely to be the truth, right? But only this hint that they found something is no evidence for the assumption that they wrote something new or created something new. Even, especially if there's not even mentioned Jerusalem in the text of Deuteronomy. This is strong evidence because you would assume that. Or there are no privileges for the king. And this is what they searched for. And at the end of the day, it is, in my eyes, the most simple explanation is they found the book Deuteronomy, or even bigger parts of the Torah. They saw we didn't obey to the Torah. without any question, and they want to re-establish the right belief in Israel again. And this goes together with the testimony of the prophets. The prophets always say, you do not obey. You have the Torah and you do not obey. It is so the basso continuo of all prophecies. The criticism, you have the Torah and you do not believe. If there is no Torah, there is no reference point for such a critique. There has to be something to refer to for the prophets. And so the easiest way is to follow the evidence, to follow the book, to follow the Bible, what is written there, and to assume that it comes from the second millennium.
Just a question to know the relation between oral tradition and written tradition, because, of course, well, every culture was an oral culture also. Of course, Josiah is a great evidence of they found a book, but it's difficult to know if there was an oral tradition of the law and in what moment they wrote that tradition. I don't know. It's difficult to know if the moment of this writing of the law, if it was in the exile or it was before. I don't know if I make myself understand.
Yes, thank you. This is a very important topic, of course, in this kind of research. And I assume that there were both. There was oral tradition of law during the Levantine, and there was written law. And we find already Codex Hammurabi and Codex Eshnunna. So there was a tradition of writing down rules, and the rules of Codex Hammurabi are very subtle and very modern, because it's an if-then structure of the rules. It's very modern. And if we find such law codes in Tel Chasor during that time, there is no reason to attack the Bible that it has been written during that time. And if I read the Bible says not that Moses wrote everything, but something. So, and it is very easy to assume he had the high education of Egypt. And it's very easy to assume that he could write. And it is very easy to assume that not all people could write and read, but some. And that there was a training for that in Israel too. Why not? And that is enough for a tradition like that. You do not have to assume too many things. And the existence of law books, by the way, Codex Eshnunna and Codex Hammurabi are not the oldest. We have even older law books. But we have only small fragments of them, of the third millennium. So there was a long tradition of writing law. And if you have a higher education, you can do this. And if you want to be the founding father of a people, it is very natural to assume that you write something like this. So it's, I do not have any difficulties to believe what is written. And I always wait for a strong counter-argument. And so far I do not see anything. Of course, it could have been that. These are possibilities. And I do not say this, I do not go so far that I say it is impossible that it was like that. But what I say is it's more probable to stay with the text of the Bible, because the possibilities are not grounded in strong evidence. It is only possible. It's not. You need more than that. There were no findings of that time that there was an activity of legislation during that time. There are no findings. If we have findings, we have to reestablish the whole system, and we have to start again from the very beginning on. We have new data, but the data we have are too weak to defend the common paradigm in my eyes. This is not enough. The counter evidence is so strong for the second millennium that such possibilities and ideas and theories are not enough to convince a rational man or woman to believe that it was like the Wellhausen-style paradigm. It is very unnatural. And if it should be true, then we need a lot of evidence for that, in my eyes. Otherwise, I cannot believe it. And it's not a question of faith, in my eyes, it's a question of rationality. Simply a question of rationality and evidence. We have the same rules for evidence at law. It's not the evidence in historical matters is not completely different from what we have in the situation at law courts. And you have to prove, and it is difficult to prove contingent facts. It's always a difficult problem in law cases. You can be right, but you do not have evidence. Then you lose the trial. Can happen. And so I think we have a lot of evidence now for the second millennium, and I do not see any evidence beyond theories and possibilities for the first millennium. And I was astonished to see that the balance goes so strong into the direction of the second millennium. And what is, again, it's a German tradition from the 19th century. And during the 19th century, at the time of Wellhausen, it might be the case that it was easier to believe in such a theory. But now, in the 21st century, we should stay with the facts. We know much more, and we have to make use of our knowledge. And what I would like to establish is a conference about methods. What is evidence in historical historical research and theological research? What is evidence, and how can we balance the probabilities of evidence in a rational way? And this goes together with my research about artificial intelligence and law. What is an argument? How strong is an argument? And I do not see and find this in theological research so far. And it would be a progress to establish something like this, a tool that forces us to become more rational in our argumentation. And from a perspective of faith, it is very convenient. The facts go together with the faith. I like it. I like it. Oh yes, it is an interesting question, but I do not want to give a quick answer on a difficult question now. But I would expect that the name Jerusalem is mentioned in the text, if Jerusalem would be the capital already. So why shall we use such a description? Maybe it was preliminary place that is referred to. So what you say is possible, of course. You can say, okay, this is a reference to Jerusalem. They do not want to mention the name of the capital, but why? It is also possible that Jerusalem didn't exist during that time. It is both possible. So whereas now the balance is equal, so to say, but I would expect, as an argument for the other side, that Jerusalem is mentioned explicitly. That would be interesting to say, okay, at least the text should have been modified later on, and so on, but we do not find it. And again, this is too weak in my eyes. Of course, I know these arguments, but they didn't convince me really. And the arguments for the other side are very strong, and they come from the comparison with external material. And we hope to make further progress by excavations to see more. And it is not surprising that it was Kitchen, an Egyptologist and archaeologist, who collected the strongest external evidence for the reliability of the Old Testament. He knew these sources so well. He was an expert of Ramesses II. He dedicated his whole life on studying this period. And if he says, oh, this is the period of Moses, there are so many parallels, read his book, it's worth to be read. Then this does convince me. This does convince me, because the other things are changes in the text, and this is always a bit change in data. So if you, as a physicist, say, I have a great theory and I'm sure that this theory is true. Unfortunately, my data do not suit to the theory, so I fake them a bit. Here you lose your job, right? And I do not want to say what to transfer that now in the field of theology. All right. Think about the end of my sentence yourself.
To help us to understand better. So even if I cannot assume or comprehend the deepness of what you said and your knowledge, but you have at least given to me a very, very interesting clue for the Old Testament and the New Testament. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for this remark. Of course, the methodological question that I focus on is relevant also for New Testament stories. It's for history in general, for theology, for New Testament, Old Testament, and legal history. I think you're right. As far as I checked the rabbinic law, it is very interesting to read the New Testament in the light of the rabbinic sources, because all of the writers were Jews. Only Luke was not a Jew. And the more you know about the rabbinic way of thinking, the better you understand the New Testament in my eyes. And it was one of the great mistakes of the German scholars of New Testament, by the way, of the 19th century, to read it with the eyes of a Greek philosopher, John and so on. They had this classical education coming from classical Greek, from the Greek philosophy, and they read the New Testament with the eyes of a Greek philosopher, but they are written by Jews. And for them was Greek only a lingua franca, not their own language, their native language. And you study the texts and the language, you can see it very clearly in my eyes. And I think it is a very bad development that in Christianity some theologians want to make a separation between New Testament and Old Testament. This destroys everything in my eyes. This is a unity. And if you lose the Old Testament, you lose the New Testament as well. Without Moses, you cannot have Jesus in my eyes. This is why I focus on the first point where it went wrong. It was this kind of research in the 19th century in Germany, in Protestant Germany.
Thank you so much. Could you please explain a little more the sheet where you cite Van Setter's, because he's, as you said, a very...
Oh yeah, I try to get Van Setter's right.
Minimal scholar, and it seems that you cite him as paradoxical in this. Could you explain why do you cite him here?
I cite him because he was one of the most radical minimalists at the beginning and during the main time of his life. And very early before he died, he stopped and made this radical change and said, okay, what we did was wrong. He was really one of the most radical minimalists. And then soon before he died, he said, okay, we have to correct our views, and then he spoke about great fantasy, and he speaks about his own work. And you need a lot of honesty to criticize yourself. He criticizes himself, right? And it is interesting to see that even scholars who worked on this paradigm for decades came at the end of their life to the result we were not on the right way.
But this is very unknown about Van Setter's. So
the book
this is the first time I heard about it.
Yeah, I'm always astonished that, at least in Germany, a lot of books and papers are cited, and a lot of books and papers are not cited. What is more important? What is more important? And the book we made in 2019, that followed the conference, was printed in a very famous book series, but it was not bought by most German faculties of theology. And Eckhart Otto, who is the editor of the book series, was very shocked to learn that all the book series is bought from all faculties, except this one and only book. Think what this does mean.
It's incredible. And it's since 26 that he changed his mind? 19, but why? But you are citing here 2006.
Yeah, this is his book. The book I refer to now is this book from 2019. We made this book. We made a conference at the SDH Basel in 2017 with theologians, legal historians, linguists, and so on. And we made.
So
we
here
collected the papers and made a book out of it.
Here is where we find this paper of Van Seters in this publication.
No, this is not. Van Seters is earlier. It's in 2006. In 2006, Van Seters wrote the book The Edited Bible, where he now, from a methodological point of view, criticizes what is going on in Pentateuch.
So he
research.
changed his mind 20 years earlier before he dies.
Okay, but he was very old then.
So 20 years writing against.
Yeah, okay. He died in 25. But I think I do not know how long he worked. He was when he changed his mind. Let's go to the. He was already 71 years old. And he lived another 19 years. Okay, this is right. Yeah, but he was already emeritus when he changed his mind. Within 71 years, became very old. Yeah.
Very welcome for the next time. Okay.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to discuss with you. Thank you so much.